Okay, for 2.2, we're going to move on to dividing fractions. And along with that, I want to talk about simplifying fractions because that's something that we always want to write fractions in is simplest form. So let's take a look first at just simplifying fractions. So if you're not familiar with this, the idea of simplifying a fraction is to essentially make the fraction smaller if you can divide the numerator and the denominator by the same number. So you look here, we have 6/8, okay, which can be represented as 6 pieces of a pie out of 8, right? So each of these red filled in pizza slices would be the numerator, and then the total number of slices is the denominator. And so what you can do is, if there is a number that is the same number that you can divide each of these by to get a whole number, then you can simplify your fraction, okay? And so you have to think of a common multiple that each of these has, okay? So you could also think of this as, when I say multiple, you can think backwards. So 3 times 2 gives you 6, 4 times 2 gives you 8. And so that's the reason that this needs to be a common factor for each of those numbers. Now, if we want to represent this visually using this pie, we can make another pie here. And if I want to make 3/4, if I want to represent 3/4, first I make 4 different slices, and then I fill in 3 of them. You can see that the size of each of these pies is the same. Okay, so the amount of red filled in here is the same as the amount of red here. And so that's why these are the same, but that's why you can simplify them, is because it won't change the amount that you're talking about. So this is 6/8, this is 3/4, but it's the same amount. So that's one way of simplifying. Another way that some of you guys might be familiar with is when you're working with an operation. Let's say you're doing 2/4 times 3/8. Another way of simplifying is you can do this method called cross simplifying. And what essentially that means is if you recognize that numbers that are diagonal, okay, this is a diagonal shape here across that I highlighted in yellow. If you can recognize that they have a common factor or a common multiple, you can simplify those before you do your multiplication. Okay, so both of these I can divide by 2. So I can take that 2, divide it by 2, and that gives me 1. I can take this 8, I have to divide it by the same number, okay, and 8 divided by 2 gives me 4. And so what that allows me to do is just a simpler math calculation. So it becomes 1/4 times 3/4, and that will give me 3/16. Okay, so you can simplify before you do your operation, or you can simplify after, once you have your answer, right? So let's do that real quick. Let's pretend I didn't simplify, and it's just 2 times 3 and 4 times 8. Okay, if I wanted to simplify now, I could divide each of these by 2. And that would give me 3/16, which is the same as over here. Okay, so when you're simplifying, you can choose to do it before you operate or after you operate. All right, so that is simplifying fractions. Now let's get into our next operation for Unit 2, which is technically going to be 2.2, which is dividing fractions. So when you divide fractions, it's pretty simple. There's only one trick. When you see a fraction and then a division sign and then another fraction, what you're going to do to the second fraction is you're going to flip it. Okay, so 1/6, if you flip those, you end up getting 6/1. So once you flip, then you're going to change your operation from division to multiplication. So those are the two steps. So first flip the second fraction, and then step 2 is change to multiplication. And then it's just a straight multiplication problem, which you already know. Okay, let's throw in a vocabulary word here. Instead of the word flip, what you're doing here is you're finding the inverse. Okay, the inverse means the opposite. Okay, so the inverse of 1/6, the inverse is 6/1. Okay, so that's a new math word that I think we should start using. So that's dividing fractions. Let's take a look at what you might see on your math work. So as you can see, fractions, division, fraction. So flip the second one and then change to multiplication. Flip the second fraction, change to multiplication. Don't get slipped up by this 2. Remember, any number can be written as a fraction by simply putting it over 1. So after you do that, you're going to flip this and then change to multiplication. Okay? Other than that, these all look pretty basic. And that is section 2.2, dividing fractions, as well as a short little mini lesson on simplifying.